Okay, welcome everyone. Welcome back to our Thursday evening Dharma talk. We are continuing with the Medicine Buddha Sutra. I appreciate seeing so many people online this evening, and it's good to continue the sutra. This evening we're going to, well, my goal will be to get through 3 more of the vows. So we're in the vow section of the text, and we will be, when I have taught this in the past, sometimes this section generates the most concern, conversation, consternation, frustration, all of the above. So if you have questions as we go through, I'll try to answer. This is a section where I think it's safe to say that the English translation often lends itself to causing more confusion. So I'll try to clarify where I can, because there is more detail in the Chinese than is translated. So I'll pull from the original text a little bit more. If we have time, hopefully, we'll get through the 7th, 8th, and 9th vow. And those vows connect to this lovely thin text I have here. This is the abridged translation. It's not the full translation, but the abridged translation of the Avatamsaka Sutra. So this was translated by Thomas Cleary, who sadly recently passed away. He is a prolific translator of Buddhist texts. There's a tremendous number of books with his name attached to the translation. We all owe him a deep debt of gratitude for his translation. And he undertook one of the first, not the first, some of the Asian Buddhist groups here in the US, especially City of 10,000 Buddhas in California, were the first to do an English translation of the Avatamsaka. But in terms of one that was printed and published and you could easily find in a bookstore, this was one of the first more widely available. It is not a complete translation, it's abridged. And I've had this one for probably since it came out. Yeah, since it was published. And it's a great introduction to some of the higher concepts in Mahayana Buddhism. That said, like many English translations, it's not perfect. There is in the works a more complete translation, and I believe this one is 1,600 pages. The complete translation is going to be multiple volumes. So this is the longest of all of the Buddha Sutras. It is famous for the depth of wisdom, and also for many of the jokes in the Buddhist world about it, either people saying it's what they read to go to sleep because it's so long, or they don't read it. But it holds a high place in the Buddhist world. So if we get to the 9th vow, if we get to the 9th vow, we'll be drawing a little bit from the Avatamsaka because it hints at part of the text that is here. So for now, we will put this aside, and we will start in on the Medicine Buddha Sutra. The reason I wanted to point it out was not just because it's sitting behind me here as we talk this evening, but also this is a good opportunity for us to recognize the interlinkage of ideas and concepts between texts. So the amount of literature in the Buddhist world is tremendous, and you'll find the same ideas repeated throughout. You'll find an idea here elaborated upon more deeply over here. If this feels or seems like a lot to read, it is. I have an excerpt of it. So I received this book when I was in college, and it was a Taiwanese group, and they print these for free and give them out. I've never seen it since, but I've seen similar publications. But in here, there's an excerpt from the Avatamsaka Sutra. So it's very common for different groups there for people to do fundraising as a way of making merit, right? So the sutra says printing the sutra, copying it. So they would raise money and then print these and then give them away for free. So a lot of temples, larger temples you go, you'll find books like this available for free. And it has the relevant section that we're going to be talking about tonight, and it has a couple other summaries. And in the front, it actually has a story of the person who worked on the translation and kind of what took them, what moved them to do the translation, and sort of some experiences they had. So there's sort of a personal aspect to this, an excerpt from the sutra, and then some guidance. So the reason I've kept it all these years is I was really moved by the person's personal story. So do you have to read the entire Avatamsaka Sutra? You don't have to. A lot of times you'll find excerpts and some summaries that are in, actually fit in your pocket. So don't be scared off. But yes, the internal consistency between the teaching is quite fascinating. And if we look at the size of the texts, that's one way, at least I think, we can start to build faith when you see the same idea explained the same way across this huge, vast body of literature, or where one text picks up the theme and explains it more deeply. So when you think about the Buddha teaching for 40 years, it starts to become more understandable, where maybe there's an introductory lecture. And then when you felt students were at the right stage, you said, now we're going to talk about this in more depth. Or you remember that thing I talked about last year, now we're going to really go in deeper, or there's a nuance to it. So this is what you see in the sutras, this constant unfolding and the teaching evolving to match the development of the students. So I don't think I've done this so far. We're going to talk about two different texts at the same time, but this is a good time to do it if we make it that far. So I'll try to not be too verbose tonight. So before I get started, are there any questions, comments, concerns? No? Okay. Seeing none, we'll get going. So I'll put the text on screen for you, and we can follow along the different vows. So if you have the sutra or not, let's see, this is page 15 in the BDK translation. So it says here, the seventh vow was, I vow that when in the future I will attain Bodhi, if there are sentient beings who are afflicted by various diseases, who have no help and no one in whom to take refuge, who have neither doctor nor medicine, neither relatives nor home, who are destitute and who have much suffering, as soon as my name passes through their ears, they will be cured of all diseases, and their bodies and minds will reside in peace and joy. They will be provided with plentiful families and property, and they will eventually realize unsurpassed Bodhi. So the part that probably jumps out at you is right away, they will be cured of all diseases. So keep an eye on that. Remember this passage, I'll put it up again. This will be important as we go through and talk, because this is the section, of course, for which Medicine Buddha Sutra is famous, for the reason why people sort of flock to the study of the text or interested in it. No one wants to be ill. And if you have a line like this in the text with such a huge promise, of course, it's going to gain attention. So this, of course, is also a part that will generate questions. How is that possible? Is this true? So we're actually going to talk about this a little bit more in depth this evening. So I'll put that back when we get to it. So this vow involves something very specific, something that's experienced by all sentient beings, and that is disease, sickness. So the seventh vow says those various diseases experienced by all sentient beings. And actually, I'll put this back up for you. So look at the text rather than look at me. What experience specifically? So those that are sick, those who are unable to return home. Actually, this is what this means. So it says those who have neither doctor nor medicine nor relative nor home. Actually, the original text doesn't mean those without home. It's referring to if you get sick and you're away from home. So if you've ever been ill while you're traveling, you understand how difficult it can be to get well. So this is what is referred to. It's a very specific thing that the sutra is discussing in reference. I'll tell you my story. I was, when I was studying in China in college, actually just after college, I got very ill and I was hospitalized, and it was rather dramatic because they were saying I needed surgery and these things. So I asked to call home before I underwent surgery, and they declined to let me even call home. So I declined surgery because it's scary, right? You don't have anyone to talk to. There's no one to take care of you. And hospitals in China at that time, the patient is reliant on their family to care for them, even in the hospital, right? So the nurse doesn't take care of you. They don't have staff to take care of you. Your family is expected to come and take care of you. That also includes food. So if you don't have family to bring you food in the hospital, you don't eat, right? It's a different model of healthcare. I'm guessing now it's probably different, but at that time it was still sort of this old style of caring for people. So how do you get better in the hospital if you don't have food to eat? So needless to say, I stayed in the hospital probably longer than I should have. So that's what the sutra is talking about here, is those people who maybe they're hospitalized or they're very ill, but they have no one nearby to take care of them. They're not even home to be cared for. So this is a type of, really specific suffering you're adding on top of the illness, the fear. It's a recognition in the sutra that in order for people to get better, they need someone to care for them. And that person can't just be a random person. It's better if, as the sutra here mentions, it's a relative. So it should be someone in the actual, this may help. Actual text says, they have no one to help, no one whom to take refuge, you have neither doctor nor medicine, nor relatives, nor home. So if someone is there to care for you, who cares about you, it's not just their job, you're going to get better sooner, right? So when mom made you soup, you got better sooner. When there was someone to give you a hug, you get better sooner. When the person who's caring for you really loves you, you get better sooner. Oh, so what happened to my story? At that time, my uncle was working at a US embassy in a different country. And I asked, I think one of my students from the English program, I asked them to send an email. And they said I was ill. They didn't say much more. So if you ever go to a country and you're going to be there a long time, register with your embassy, because if you register with your embassy, they will send a search party. So after several days of being hospitalized with no food, I'm tall, but I'm not a big person. So I had lost a lot of weight. I was very weak. I woke up and there was two people from the US embassy, and they had a satellite phone, and they said, here, talk to your family. So I was found. And after that, I got a little bit better medicine, and here I am. So I got better. But it can be scary if you don't have someone to care for you. So my uncle still jokes about that time with me. And he says, you're lucky, we sent someone to find you, or you may have been lost forever in Northeast China. So, but it makes a huge difference, right? If there's someone that cares about you, cares for you. Here in the United States, we have a lot of people who are currently, the new asylum seeker immigrant on the border, those from Haiti. They're fleeing numerous earthquakes, political violence. Many of the people have left Haiti, gone to South America, and then made their way north through Central America and Mexico. And then it makes the news when they get to the border. They're ill. This is the kind of compassion the sutra's aimed at, right? You're ill and you're far away from home and there's no one to care for you. So we have these experiences in life. We have these kind of difficulties. So when we're reading the Medicine Buddha's vows, we should be reflecting on when have we seen this in our own experience, but also when have we maybe ignored those problems, or when have we failed to recognize them? So we're being asked to recognize that suffering and then generate compassion for it. If you're ill, right, the other component of the sutra, if you're ill and you don't have medicine. So at that time in China, they had domestically produced medicines, and then if they had foreign made pharmaceuticals, they were usually from the United Kingdom. And it wasn't until after the embassy visited that they said, oh, we'll open a special cabinet and give you the medicine from the United Kingdom. Of course, then I got better, right? So if you don't have the right medicine, then you're not going to get better. If you don't have access to medicine, you're not going to get better. That medicine may not exist or be available in your area. There's a lot of different aspects to healthcare. For us, we probably take for granted that we can go to the local pharmacy and get medicine. I know people who've done, medical missions to 4 countries, and they set up a clinic somewhere and people walk 20, 30 miles. One person I know did a medical mission in South America, and the old women of the village would bring the babies, right? Because the parents had to work. So they would carry these babies for days to get the polio shot, right? To get a vaccine. That's how important it was to them. So access to medicine is an important aspect. You can read part of the Medicine Buddha Sutra as sort of the fundamental human rights, right? What's the basic needs of humanity? The United Nations has a international bill of human rights, and it includes healthcare, education. Believe it or not, in America, we don't have that. You read the Constitution, you're not entitled to an education, you're not entitled to healthcare. So I think as a society, as humanity can learn from the vows. If you look around with a truly compassionate heart, you see what people really need. In my case, when I first got sick, I was in a smaller city in the province, and then they didn't have very much healthcare. So they moved me to the provincial capital, which was had a university, medical university, teaching university. So there were foreign medical students and things there, mainly from developing countries, not Europe or United States, but developing countries. So they had better care, but even there, it was limited. So this is still the case, right? We saw earlier this year with COVID, hospitals in India running out of oxygen and being unable to treat people. So that you have the knowledge doesn't mean you have the resources. That you have resources doesn't mean that they're available in your area. That you have all of those things still doesn't mean you're going to get well if you don't have someone to care for you. I got the medicine, but then I had to go find food. So I was hospital gown, closing it in the back, walking across the street to the little shop, trying to get some noodles. because there's no food in the hospital. So all of these things are important. So when you're reading the sutra, remember, if we're scratching our head like, oh, who doesn't have someone to take care of them? Who doesn't have medicine? That most of the world doesn't, right? We are in a very fortunate position. Okay, so the part that I wanted to focus on, and of course that gets the most questions, and one of you asked the question previously, so I'm going to use the example tonight. So this part, they will be cured of all disease, right? So as soon as my name passes through their ears, they will be cured of all disease. All you have to do is hear the Medicine Buddha's name and you will be cured of all disease. So I was asked after the last class, I won't name you. One of you said they had seen a story online about a person who had a very serious illness and had been praying to Medicine Buddha for 10 years, and then heard that their illness was sort of uncurable and had lost their faith in the teaching, right? They felt they had done everything and they had not been cured as the sutra promises. So when you see a line like this, I think we have to address that question and analyze it. So that's what we're going to do next. First of all, immortality is not part of the Buddha's teaching. The Buddha died. All of the Buddha students died. The human body is not built to last forever. 120 years is about the max. Most of us, 80s to 90s, and we feel like we had a good run. So there is a limit. So this does not suggest that, if you do this practice, you will live forever and will avoid all illness. So first I want to put this up so you see the text. The translation could be better. So this is the part I was working on earlier. I retranslated this section. Forget this part for a minute. It says, their bodies and minds will reside in peace and joy. This part is more accurate. So it says, through hearing of the teaching, you will have anle in Chinese, peace of mind, right? You'll have peace in your body and mind. You will have tranquility, will attain tranquility, a serene state. So this is the result. The part that is not translated so well here is they will be cured of all disease. And the meaning here is actually Chinese word "de," and that in a basic sense means to obtain. In a broader Buddhist philosophical sense, it means you're receiving the understanding, you're able to grasp the teaching. And by grasping the teaching, you can address the karma that is causing the disease. So this is a statement about the ultimate source of disease in the Buddhist thinking, which is all of these things are part of our karma. It's cause and effect. So before anyone gets too weirded out, remember karma is cause and effect. Cause and effect, or your karma, is going to depend also on surrounding circumstances. So if you have a predisposition to a medical condition, that doesn't mean you will get the medical condition. If you have family history of some, heart disease or high blood pressure, doesn't mean that you will have heart disease or high blood pressure. It means that if you don't take care of yourself, you have a much higher likelihood of getting it. The same is true with karma. You may have the karma of, having a likelihood of a disease, but that's something that can be addressed if you address your mind, your practice, where you live, what you eat, the kind of life you live. All these things are going to matter. Some cancers are environmental. Some cancers are genetic. If your family has a predisposition to a certain type of cancer, that doesn't mean that you will get it 100%. It's dependent on a lot of factors. So this section is actually related to the deeper Buddhist idea of the alaya consciousness. So the aspect of our memory, our consciousness, our karma that attaches to the true mind and follows us from life to life. So what the sutra is actually talking about is alleviation of that karma, not magic healing of disease every time you hear the Buddha's name. If that were the case, we would just have speakers in the hospital saying, medicine Buddha, medicine Buddha, medicine Buddha, everybody. Oh, that's all you need. This is actually the vows of the medicine Buddha are opening a doorway, are paving a road for us to follow. If we do, then we get the result. The result is alleviating this past karma, the taking us out of the circumstances where the negative karma will arise. So let's say your illness is, well, here's a good example, true story. When I first joined the temple in California, we had I want to say young man. He's probably a little bit younger than I am now though, but he had done time in prison. And when you get out of prison, you are on parole and you usually have to go back to your home, wherever that is. Well, he had gotten into a lot of trouble with gangs in Los Angeles. He didn't want to go back to Los Angeles because there was no way for him to avoid getting caught up in the gang life again. So he moved to Sacramento and he started coming to the temple. So he was there quite often. He would help, he was meditation class, really nice guy, really was thinking of spiritual practice as a way to cleanse his karma. He wanted to change his life. And he knew that if he went back to his old neighborhood, he'd get caught up in the gang because the gang would come looking for him. He didn't have a choice, right? You stay in the gang or you either die or get killed. There's no getting out of the gang. So the only way to avoid that karma was to avoid the location. However, the way he went about it was he violated his parole. He left the area he was supposed to leave. So he ended up having to go back to prison for a few more months. But he said, I remember before he went back, he said, that's better than going back to the gang, right? So we have to recognize what the sutra is talking about. It's actually talking about the residue of our karmic associations that lead to disease, and that if we can alleviate that, then we no longer have the disease. So the translation here is not as accurate as it should be. It's much more nuanced. It's not an immediate cure. It can be because for some of us, the source of the illness is not, something so acute like, oh, I have I fell on a stick and it's impaled me. I just need to get it out and get better. Sometimes the source of our illness is far more nuanced, right? Medicine may be able to treat it, but they may not know the reason for the illness. I probably mentioned this before, but if you read Buddhist texts on illness, a lot of them say all illness starts with ignorance. And it means from philosophically, but also that we often don't know the real source. And I always thought, well, how convenient that just fits so neatly into Buddhist philosophy. And now we have, right, illness, COVID, where the vast majority of the people who are hospitalized and dying are dying because of ignorance, right? Few vaccinated people are dying. Some vaccinated people are getting ill, but few of them are hospitalized. Those that are, dying by and large are those who've chosen not to be vaccinated. Why are they not getting vaccinated? Small percent can't. either because of age or they have some other they're medically fragile. Vast majority, it's ignorance. It's a willful decision to avoid getting ill. So oddly, I've like, oh, this teaching is really accurate. Um, you know, so what the sutra is really talking about is this very nuanced philosophical concept that we need to remove sort of that karmic residue from our consciousness to avoid, right, the illness that may come later in this lifetime, maybe another lifetime, but it doesn't mean, and it shouldn't be construed to be that some sort of, if you hear the Buddha's name, you're instantly cured. So the translation or translating it this way is not the best way to do it. The Sanskrit term is prapti. The Chinese is de, and it goes back to the Abhidharma. So one of the earliest efforts in the Buddhist world to sort of restate the Buddhist teaching and explain these concepts. And so it's really related to the manifestation of things from our deepest consciousness coming forward. This happens, on a scientifically verifiable, immediate way. Sometimes people are literally scared to death, or they have experiences where they worry themselves to death, or they become, some psychological state leads to illness. From a Buddhist standpoint, the same is true, but it can manifest from the deepest recesses of our subconscious, the alaya consciousness. So that's actually what this section is referring to. The fact that it is poorly translated so often leads to a lot of misunderstandings and people getting frustrated with the teaching. And if you understand that section in that manner, then the rest of the vows make a lot more sense, and they start to line up with the general aspects of the Buddhist teaching. There's another aspect to this that is oftentimes not discussed in the West, and that is the Buddhist teaching is sometimes hard to accept because it's radical individual responsibility, right? We'd rather be told, give it up to the God or the deity, or just pray and everything will be better. They'll take care of it. That can be comforting. The Buddhist teaching says we have to take care of it. The teaching is a roadmap for how to do it. It's, if you remember the beginning of the sutra, Manjushri's asking, the Buddha, give us a teaching to help people, right? So every time, how can they help themselves? How can they help themselves? But we have to take care of it. We have to do it together, right? The Buddha established the community so you're not alone, right? We're doing it together. The Buddha offers tools. We still have to take the tools and use them, right? You can't just say, well, I bought the tool, right? So I'm okay. I have this thing, so it's fine. No, you have to use it. You need to wear it down, wear it out, and then maybe get a new one and keep using it. So in the Buddhist teaching, the hand is stretched out, but it's still up to us to reach up and take that hand of help. It's not strictly hearing. When the sutra says, when my name passes through their ears, it means that is planting a seed in your subconscious. It will eventually ripen to help you get out of these illnesses. It's not well, I heard the name, so I'm cured. We complain, we moan. As they say in Japanese, we monku, right? We complain about things. We need to help ourselves. We and you're doing that tonight. You're listening to the teaching. Right? But in this way, the teaching has an inner logic or structure. So you can't read the sutra that seems like very logically structured about how we go about doing practice and helping, and then just say, oh, all you need to do is hear my name. Well, that doesn't seem to match up with the teaching. And that's because the translation is not totally accurate. We are exhorted in the sutra not to do things because that's better for our health. It's not because just by avoiding it, right, we're pleasing someone and they're going to help us. So that's the actual or proper understanding for that part of the text. That part of the vow ends. It says they will be provided with plentiful families and property, and they will eventually realize their unsurpassed Bodhi. So this means you're going to have a lot of kids in like 700 acres. Is that what this means? So we run up against interesting translation. It's actually referring to it, they will have the requisite family needs. So you could translate it as they're being prosperous, but actually it means you will have what is sufficient, what you need, what is adequate. So you'll have what the family needs. We all have what is adequate. We are all plentiful, right? I know this because you all have a computer. So everyone here is plentiful. It may not be the latest, greatest, shiniest, fastest, but everyone here has adequate. What is adequate? And this is what the sutra is talking about. Prosperous in ancient times didn't mean a sports car for every day of the week. It meant having what was needed for life. So what we need in order to work towards enlightenment, what we need in order to attain enlightenment, what practitioners need for the basics of life. Somehow your food and shelter has to be accommodated, right? You have to eat. And that's what it's talking about. The basics, your needs will be met. When I went to do my training, I didn't have a sponsor. So typically in Asia, whatever temple you came through would send you to the seminary for training. This is also the case in like the Tibetan tradition in India. If a kid goes to the monastery, they have to have money for their food to be paid for. The monastery doesn't just magically have enough food to feed everyone. So someone at home needs to send money to accommodate them. So that's what this is talking about. I didn't have that, so I had to look around and go, what are my options? I have to sell my car. So that's how I did my training. Then I was like, oh, what else can I sell? I need more money for the plane ticket. But it came, right? I had what was adequate. I didn't have anything fancy, but I had what was adequate. So when we read the sutra, we have to read it in terms of realistic, what is really adequate? What is it that we really need? Our struggle today is nothing compared to the struggle of practitioners in the past. I didn't get shipwrecked 1,000 miles off course and have to go overland into central China and then learn Sanskrit in a few months. And then, right, that's the Kobodaishi story. I didn't flee the country illegally under penalty of death to acquire the Buddha Sutra. That was Sunjang's story, brought back most of the sutras. I could just go to the bookstore and buy the text. In fact, if you're old enough, I think I still have the original book. Oh, I do. Anybody remember Borders? Yeah, that's when I got this. So that was easy to acquire. I didn't have to risk my life going across Afghanistan or something to acquire the text. So this is the, what is adequate. So in this way, the sutra is correct. I've been given what's adequate, in order to obtain the teaching. Okay. So that's the 7th vow. So before I go to the 8th, does anybody have any questions on that aspect of the text?
For me, I over the years have sort of looked at my life and what I taught my children. It's like a lot of the things in life is their own responsibility because, like, you can't rely on this, not on handouts and lack of the better word, be lazy or anything like that. And because I guess being a tough mom, they have both been successful and not monetary wise, but experience wise in their lives that they can stand up on their own 2 feet. Yeah.
I think it's I might have a different perspective because things weren't so easy all the time growing up, and had other interesting experiences like being in a remote Chinese hospital. But I have to be thankful, there was still a hospital to go to. It may have looked like a hospital out of the 1950s in America, but it was still a hospital. So what do we actually need? I think sometimes if we refocus on need versus want, we start to alleviate obstacles. If we really accept that our lives are in our own hands, then it's scary, it's uncomfortable. Sometimes we wish that wasn't the case, but it's very empowering. It sometimes means a lot, short-term pain. And I think one of the reasons why people get discouraged is in the beginning, it can be very painful because we're reorienting. We have to pull ourselves out of this situation or that situation, or this group of friends or that group of friends, or we're extricating ourselves from, we realize how bad our situation is. We're trying to get out. And that's painful. But in the long run, it gets easier. So I always think back to that gentleman who was at the temple, and I think he knew he was violating his parole. He knew he would probably get caught and go back to jail, but a few more months in jail was for him better than death. It was better than the gang finding him. So he took that punishment, but that's what was required. But he wasn't upset that he got arrested again. He recognized that's the consequence of him having been involved in the gang to begin with. And it was only him doing time in prison that, made him recognize that. So my teacher used to teach at Folsom Prison. Any Johnny Cash fans? And that's where he met the student. And it was, Asai Sensei used to say, prison and the monastery are very similar. It's a place for you to work on your karma. You don't choose your schedule, you don't choose the food, you don't choose your roommate, and for that young man, it really stuck, and he recognized he had to get himself out of the situation. So short term, not so good. Long term, much better than falling back into the old pattern. So. Okay, we'll go on to number 8. And number 8 is usually where this bumps up against our Western modern thinking. So we'll take some time to talk about this. The 8th great vow. I vow that when in the future I will attain Bodhi, if there are women who, because of being female, are afflicted by the 100 failings specific to women, and who come to greatly dislike the female body and they wish to rid themselves of it, as soon as they have heard my name, their female bodies will be transformed into male bodies with all the aspects of great men, of a great man, and they will eventually realize unsurpassed Bodhi. This vow is often cited in a lot of modern literature as being at the core of sexism in Buddhism. And I'm going to argue that that's not the case. And again, it often is the result of incomplete translation and failing to put this in context. But I am open to, I'm like that, what's the meme? You know, I think this, prove me wrong, right? So we should talk about this one. So I have heard a lot of people get upset with regard to this. So in the future, I will attain enlightenment. The text is probably better translated as, if there are women at that time who are disturbed or afflicted. The can also be translated as constrained or vexed, right? Vexed with the various conditions of being a woman. And that due to these vexing conditions, you wish to free yourself of the female body, then this practice will help you. And it helps you by obtaining a male body. So what are the vexations of being female? And it helps, I think, to consider this from a historic perspective rather than modern people living in North America or Western Europe. So I'll start with a simple thing. Do women get equal pay as men? Is there such thing as sexism? Yeah. Pregnancy, childbirth. They're often considered property. Yeah. The patriarchy. This vow is a very deep insight. So when it says the 100 failings isn't actually accurate. It's 100 vexations. It's the things that befall women, conditions that are unique to being a woman in human society that the medicine Buddha is focused on. Buddhism, right? We do not have a creator. The Buddha did not create the situation. The Buddha is responding to the situation of humans and recognizing that human society, yes, in the comments, domestic abuse, physical abuse, all manner of things. So human society places women at a lower, devalues women. And as a result, they often aren't able to achieve dreams, right? So we're seeing this in many countries, right? Women aren't eligible to even have education. It is still the case where, female children are not valued the same as male children. That can manifest from, everything from where does the family put their resources, food and education, to discarding those children. Many people don't have the choice of who to marry or when to marry. They're married off. They're considered property. So this vow is focused on that. It should not be read as the medicine Buddha saying there's 100 failings. Women have 100 failings. That's not accurate. This is not an accurate translation. The real translation is there are vexations. There's trouble. And so we're actually I'm going to quote from the sutta where the Buddha allows women to become nuns. And I think that'll give you some insight. Because he says very specifically, women have all the same ability spiritually that men do. Society makes it difficult. And I think that will help. So initially, so when the Buddha was a child, the Buddha's mother died a few days after the Buddha was born. His aunt raised him, and that included, nursing him, caring for him. And his aunt came to the Buddha and asked that women be ordained. And very famously, the Buddha turned her away 3 times. She comes with a large group of women and, can you ordain us in the same way that you've ordained the men? And the Buddha says no 3 times. And his aunt is incredibly upset and stands around outside the assembly so long that, her feet and legs and hands swell. She has physically crying, just completely upset. And she goes to the Buddha's attendant, the monk Ananda, and asks Ananda, why won't the Buddha allow women to go forth from the home? Why can't we become nuns also? And Ananda is not sure. So he says, I will inquire sort of on your behalf, why not allow women? And so I'll read you the section. So he said to the Buddha, Lord, if a woman were to go forth from the home life into the homeless life in the Dhamma and Vinaya, so into the taking on the vows of a monk, made known by the Buddha, would she be able to realize the fruit of the practice? And the Buddha responds, yes, Ananda, she would. So he says, in that case, your aunt has been of great service to the Buddha. She has been the Blessed One's aunt, foster mother, nurse, giver of milk. When the Blessed One's mother passed away, she gave him milk. It would be good if women might attain the going forth from the home life into the homeless life. So he says, Ananda, if my aunt accepts 8 rules of respect, that will be her acceptance into a nun. So the Buddha initially adds additional rules for nuns that didn't apply to monks. Why do you think women would need more rules than men? And I will say specifically, these rules placed the nuns at a slightly lower level. So they had to show respect to the monks. They had to bow to monks. They couldn't get too close to the monk community. There was rules that, they had to ask the monks permission to do things. Why do you think this would be the case? So some thoughts is because of the monks. Those pesky monks can't control themselves. That is actually partially true, but there's something bigger. Yeah, male-oriented society wouldn't accept them. So remember, the Buddha's 2,500, 2,600 years ago in India. The community is oriented around the Indian custom or tradition of wandering ascetics. So you have no house, you have nothing. You're dependent on people in the world, the community, giving you scraps of food. The Buddha has already been pretty crazy by saying you don't have to be born into the priestly caste to become a holy person. I will accept anyone. So the Buddha's from the warrior caste. He accepts people from the lowest caste, the untouchables. So let's modernize this story. Let's rewind to, 1860 in America. And you say, I'm going to build a church and I'm going to let Black people in, and they don't have to sit in a separate area. They can sit right next to the white people, and they can come up and get communion, and they'll drink, from the cup, just like the white people do. And we'll all sit around and eat together. And if you don't like it, I'll take my teaching elsewhere. What do you think? Is that church going to get burned down? Probably. So what do you think is going to happen when the Buddha's already allowed dark-skinned people from the lowest caste, who Indian society said they're only good for, hauling poop and disposing of bodies? He's allowed them in. He's allowed servants in. He's taken in all these different types of men, and now he's going to let in women. Right. So the Buddha said, this is going to be disruptive to the community, but I've got to add some extra rules. And he had to add extra rules because if you're dependent on the world giving you food, if they see monks and nuns, right? This is a conservative religious order, right? So you've left home, you're celibate. If you see them looking too friendly, then they don't look very holy. You don't give them food and everyone starves, right? So you had to be very careful about how he ordered the community. So that's what this is reflecting. And the story is a good illustration of, Ananda's correct, right? Your aunt has given you everything. She raised you after your mother died, gave you milk. She suffered, and you're making her suffer. Why? Right. So the Buddha had to say, you have to be really, really sure, because this is going to be really, really hard. But he agreed and said, there's no difference spiritually. So a lot of times when even the story of the Buddha's aunt is retold. I've actually heard people in academia retell it and say, this is the inherent sexism in Buddhism. It's not something inherent to Buddhism. It's a recognition of some limitation of society. And in order to actually do the teaching and actually in order to start the order, the Buddha knew there was limits, right? It can only go so far. And he was successful in establishing, women, people of all levels of society, accepting anyone. But you had to do it in a way that was amenable to the society that existed at the time. Interestingly, if you go, especially in Chinese community, the larger Chinese diaspora, so Vietnam, Taiwan, Malaysia, mainland China, even in Tibet, the nuns are incredibly strong. Their communities are very strong. Their practice is really good. My teacher used to say to me all the time that women make better practitioners, but many of them don't have an opportunity to practice until they're older, again, because society has not allowed them to seek out the teaching. Parents have said, no, you can't go do these things. They find themselves with the vexing duty in society to, just like the Buddha's aunt, to be a caregiver, to take care of others. But I remember distinctly one evening we in meditation class, and my teacher pointed. There was 3 women who would always come and help in the kitchen, and they never did meditation. And the first night they did meditation, they just looked so calm and serene. He said it's so much easier for them, right? It's so much easier because they're not competitive, but all the men are trying to be competitive and this warrior attitude towards sitting in meditation. But he said that it's really sad that society doesn't give them the same opportunity. So we still suffer. We've gotten better, but we still suffer. One of the other things that was of a concern to the Buddha was creating a group of women that lived outside the home, right? Who's going to remember? There's no police. So you don't want to create a group of women that are then, in fact, it's in the sutta, would just be a target for crime. So this was a serious concern, right? How do you organize this? So this is a significant issue for ancient time, and it's still a concern. It's still a problem in a lot of countries, and so depending on their development direction, Southeast Asia, they no longer have ordained women, and they're resistant to it for a lot of reasons. One of which is a lot of the communities are sort of open air, and they're very worried about having a group of women with no security. So that's what this is about, right? This is about how do you, in a world where, think about human population, where does a woman today have an equal opportunity at education, career? If they decide, I want to go study Sanskrit and classical Chinese, and their parents say, sure, that sounds great, we'll pay for that. And then afterwards, I don't want to get a job, I want to go, meditate in a temple. And the family, oh, that's fine, yeah, it's very, very little, and even fewer, just to have that sort of equality. So in terms of women's liberation movements, there's most of the world is still lagging, and that's what this is about. If you've had that vexation, and it's something that's really gotten you down, then there's a recognition that rebirth in a different body may be something. That's another opportunity. Yes, Christina.
I just thought of it like in Finland, they're very men and women are equal, because even in Finnish language, there is no he and she. there's just one pronoun, han, meaning him or her. So it's, I don't know, now I need to investigate how and when that came about.
This is actually the case in many of the sutras. If you read the Chinese, it just says person, but a lot of Western translators will translate that into man, in much the same way that a lot of Western literature is translated. So it adds it genders consciousness in ways that was never intended. The same is true, for gender issues completely. You'll notice, when you look at the Bodhisattva statues, actually, I'll put this back up because it's helpful to illustrate. So if you see this body, right, the reason why the limbs are ample, there's more flesh, is to not make it hyper gendered. If you look at a lot of the Bodhisattva statuary, they're gender non-specific. Right? You can't tell when you look. You'll see these flowing robes and this very gentle face and this teeny tiny mustache. So this is actually on purpose, that we need a human form to see, but from the beginning of forever, Buddhist art has been very softened for that reason. The whole point of robes is to hide the form so that it's not announcing gender. Everybody gets the same robes. Everybody shaves their head, so behind you really can't tell. I know when I go to Asia, sometimes as people get older, they had their head shaved for so long, have to concentrate for a long time. I was like, I don't know if monk or nun, priest, what, who. You just can't tell anymore as people soften. And that softening, we let down all this sort of rigid, hard, gender specific stuff that gets in the way of us just being open to one another. So I want to just make sure we're not inadvertently reading sexism into this, or some sort of inherent Buddhist idea of inferiority. It's really a recognition of human situation, human experience. It can be difficult, right? There's other issues too around this. We, again, remember, we have modern hygiene, toileting facilities, all kinds of things. Life gets harder if you're living a subsistence type of existence. And that can also translate to wild animals and living in a forest, and all manner of issues, and change of seasons, and you name it. So there are additional guidelines historically for monks and nuns for these reasons, in terms of robes and what's worn. They are all practical. So one of the questions is it too far to interpret this as an early recognition of trans men? I think what's more, maybe if we read it in the opposite direction, not so much as people who are in between, but that the rigid distinction of gender isn't something that's inherent to our consciousness. It's something that we have as a biological component. But sometimes, some lifetimes we're male, sometimes lifetimes we're female, some lifetimes we, may not identify strongly with one or the other. But if you look at the heavenly realms, as you go up in the levels of the heavens, there's no longer a form, it's just light. So gender is irrelevant. So gender is just something that we have right now. So for us, it's rather irrelevant. What's specific or what's important in the Buddhist world, and again, sometimes people, they read their modern sensibilities into it. If you're in the monastery, you shouldn't be doing any sexual stuff. So there are rules against any kind of sex, whether that be with someone of the opposite sex or the same sex, because that's what you're giving up. You're actively giving it up. These rules don't apply, and they're irrelevant for people who are not in the temple or not wearing robes. So we shouldn't be reading it as sort of an across the board thing. However, the rules for monks and nuns are also very realistic. So there's rules for what happens if a nun becomes pregnant. So there's rules for that. So it doesn't get into how she became pregnant. There's historically a waiting period before you became a nun, and the waiting period was to ensure you weren't pregnant, because a lot of people were leaving forced marriages and coming to the Buddhist community, but the monastery didn't have a way to care for infants, so they would make the novice wait and then ensure that there wasn't pregnancy, because people would come up pregnant. But if they did, there was rules for how do you raise the child, and it doesn't get into how. It's not like, oh, you became pregnant, so you're out, right? There's a recognition that things happen in various ways, and what do you do then? So it's always a very compassionate outlook, but you're supposed to wait until the age of at least age 5 to join the monastic community as a novice. So birth to 5, better at home. After that, then they would take in, orphans and things, but harder to care for children so young in that environment. Okay, I think, did we just look at yeah, so I think we covered the component. So that's the 9th vow. We'll go on to the next one, which is also, or sorry, that was the 8th vow. We'll go on to the 9th vow. The 9th vow was, I vow that when in the future I will attain Bodhi, I will cause all sentient beings to escape from Mara's net. They will be delivered from the bonds of all the non-Buddhist paths. If they fall into the dense forest of various kinds of wrong views, I pull them out and establish them in the correct view, in order to make them gradually cultivate and study various bodhisattva practices, so that they will quickly realize unsurpassed perfect Bodhi. This one is less prone to misunderstanding, but there's some, as is often the case, some nuggets of wisdom buried in the text that don't come out totally in translation. So it starts off fairly clear. So when in the future I attain enlightenment, and seeing beings falling into Mara's net, right? So Mara is the personification of unwholesome activity. So being trapped in delusion, wrong thinking, etc. I will help them get out of that net, right? They're caught up in that web, and especially delivered from the bonds of non-Buddhist paths. And here it doesn't mean specifically, I'm going to like yank people out of other religions. That's not what this means. By non-Buddhist paths, what's meant is the philosophical perspective of any path that doesn't accord with the teaching of cause and effect. So if you are associating with the teaching of any sort, you went to university and you had a favorite philosophy professor and you found a particular philosopher and you're like, this is what I want. The Buddha says when it doesn't accord with cause and effect, then this is something that we should try to transform people. They're not recognizing that their actions have an effect on people. Why is that a problem? Because if we don't recognize cause and effect, then it's hard to develop morality, because people don't recognize that their behavior, their words, their thoughts, what they're putting out in the world can harm others. Only when they recognize cause and effect do they start to practice compassion. So this is actually very practical. How do we recognize? How do we practice compassion? This would be true even with regard to a different religion, right? So let's say a religion teaches, let's say people are reading the Medicine Buddha Sutra to say, all you need to do is hear the Medicine Buddha's name and you will be miraculously cured. Well, that violates cause and effect, right? So it doesn't get at the actual cause of the illness or its effect on you and then why. Rather, if we're reading the sutra to understand, here's a teaching for unwinding and unraveling the background causes so you can work on that and then liberate yourself from the illness, that's accurate. It's not just a snap your fingers. If this was the case, I'd be walking through the halls of hospitals right now, Medicine Buddha, COVID patients, wake up, Medicine Buddha. So that's not the accurate way we should understand. What kind of thinking specifically? So the sutra says, if they fall into the dense forest of the various kinds of wrong views, what kind of wrong views specifically? Lo and behold, the sutra actually says the 10 fetters. So the 10 kinds of afflictions. So it actually gives a list. It's not translated here, but it actually has the list. So those would be things like lack of conscience, lack of shame, envy, stinginess, right? If you're the new Scrooge, intense remorse where you're just unable to operate, laziness or drowsiness, where you're always falling asleep, flighty people, this kind of thing. So there's a list. It gives you actual specifics. There's also usually, and it shows up in other sutras, just what they call the 4 fetters. This is usually a boiled down or shorter list, easier to remember. So desire, aversion, some type of we have some idea of morality that's fundamentally flawed. Like it's okay to do things to this group of people, but not that group of people, right? Or I'll give you an example. When here's a good one. When the United States was first founded, with the Puritans, when they set off on the journey, they said, well, we're going to the new chosen land. And so we heard there are people there. So they are either one of the, lost tribes of Israel, and we just need to teach them the gospel again, or, they're against us. So we will preach it to them, but if they resist, then it's okay to kill them. Right? So this is kind of a flawed morality, or a flawed view of self, right? So this is another, we start to think, we as we are right now are permanent. So those are the 4 general categories. This is what the Medicine Buddha is saying, is trying to liberate people from. It also uses this imagery of let's see here. It says the dense forest of various kinds of wrong views. You could also translate this. Chinese is kind of flexible and poetic. A dense forest of views, or that you're sowing the seeds of wrong view that will grow into a dense forest that obstructs your way out, right? You get trapped in it. So it could be interpreted this way. This is both the beauty and the vexation of classical Chinese. It's very malleable in terms of understanding, but in that way, you can go back and read it often, and it's very beautiful. So if it says your way is obstructed, by this dense forest of seeds that you planted of wrong views, then what is the way specifically? If I say wrong view, you say, not wrong view, but
right view.
thank you. Sorry. So this points right back to Eightfold Path. So when we say right view, we go, well, what is the right view? So the right view is cause and effect. And cause and effect points back to Four Noble Truths, right? So the Buddhist teaching, again, in coherence is built in, right? The teaching is constantly expanding on the initial statement of the Buddha, magnifying it, but you can also trace right back to the beginning. So the first aspect of the Eightfold Path, right? So broadly speaking, it's engaging in wholesome activity, wholesome views, purifying our activities. That's what the Eightfold Path is about. And we're distinguishing it from wrong views that lead us into situations we don't want to be in. So wrong view or right view, actually in Sanskrit is drishti. So any yoga practitioners in the group, you've probably worked on drishti. So when you do yoga, asana, the actual physical movements, when you stretch out your hand and you do something, your view, your drishti is going to either land on your hand or off farther. And it's a way of expanding the mind. So that Sanskrit idea, drishti, is actually your vision. But when we lift our view past, our own being and we lift it out, then that's how we start building compassion. So this concept of drishti, or view, or literally seeing, is also built into Buddhist architecture. So this is why when you walk in, you look up, statue. So you're moving your vision, your regard out to something larger. So it's operating in terms of art and teaching and text and internalization. What else? Wrong view is also sometimes erroneous views, where we ignore cause and effect. We ignore these incorrect understandings of things. And I'm gonna, I think we have just enough time. So, Avatamsaka. Medicine Buddha says, we're gonna pull you out. I'll put this back so you can see. We'll pull you out and establish them in the correct view in order to make them gradually cultivate and study the various bodhisattva practices. What are the bodhisattva practices? There is a roadmap for the bodhisattva practices. It is in the Avatamsaka Sutra. What is in the Avatamsaka Sutra? That is the roadmap. It is the vows of the bodhisattva Samantabhadra. And those are in the Avatamsaka Sutra. The problem is, in Thomas Cleary's translation, he didn't translate that chapter. So that's why I went and got my little tiny extracted chapter. And the 10 vows of Samantabhadra, like the 12 vows of the Medicine Buddha, are the roadmap for how to become a bodhisattva. So here are the 10 vows of Samantabhadra: to worship and respect all Buddhas, to make praises to the thus come ones, to practice profoundly the giving of offerings, to repent and reform all karmic hindrance, to rejoice and follow in merit and virtue, to request that the Dharma wheel be turned, to request that the Buddhas remain in the world, to always follow the Buddha's teaching, to constantly accord with all living beings, to transfer all merit and virtue universally. So this is the blueprint of practice, and it is laid out in the Avatamsaka Sutra And this is what the medicine Buddha is saying. I will try to get people to practice this. So again, internal coherency within the teaching. So here's the medicine Buddha hinting at the Avatamsaka Sutra. So the two texts point at one another. And of course, to transfer all merit and virtue universally, right? So whatever merit we're gaining from our practice, we're sharing it universally with everyone. We're not making distinctions. We don't have that, well, we're worthy of the practice, but certain people aren't, right? We don't have this kind of false thinking about cause and effect. So this is one of the key components. That chapter of the Avatamsaka Sutra is worthy of its own lecture series. For obvious reasons, I don't think we're going to lecture the entire Avatamsaka Sutra. It takes 30 years. But it's a wonderful text to study. However, what is helpful, I think, are smaller texts. Many temples do make these available, where they lay out and explain how we should understand those vows and how we can put them into practice. But when you see, in the temple, people offering flowers, bowing, reciting the Buddha's name, that's coming right out of the Avatamsaka Sutra, because Samantabhadra Bodhisattvas is sort of the blueprint for the Bodhisattva vow, the goal. What should you do if you want to be a Bodhisattva? What should you actually practice? That is the practice. So you'll find Buddha halls where there's a lot of tiny little statues of the Buddha, and people are bowing because it says in the vows to worship and respect all Buddhas. So symbolically, you're doing that. So the architecture, again, is reflecting the teaching. So here the medicine Buddha says, in order to lead all sentient beings to the great vow, the vow of attaining enlightenment for all beings, not just yourself, the study of the vows is important to reorient our thinking, so how we should set our mind. We don't recite the Buddha's name, praise, offer for them, right? They don't want to hear it. We do it for ourselves. We're doing the practice to perfect ourselves. It's not them saying, well, that's what you should do for me. But that's not the concept. It's our responsibility. It's we're not giving up responsibility to someone else. Right? So we shouldn't read the vows as, well, I heard the teaching tonight, so I'm saved. That's not how we should look at this. It's practicing compassion for others. And that means it's going to hurt. It's going to hurt us because we're being asked not to hurt others. It means we sometimes have to swallow our pride and recognize that, speaking kindly of people is better than the opposite. Because it has to do with what that does to us. It's not about what they deserve. It's about recognizing what that does to our own mind. We have to see clearly our connections to problems. Right? We have to see no matter what, we do have some connection. Most things. Sometimes somebody just runs a red light and hits your car and you have a bad day and you have no connection, right? But many situations we have some connections. The purpose, tonight in going through the sutra, why are we doing this? Is so that we have a proper perspective and the proper intentions to spiritual practice. The teaching is excellent. People mess up everything. People practice incorrectly. The teaching is wonderful. It doesn't matter if you're, truly following what Jesus said. Right? That teaching is excellent. Most people don't actually practice that. They make of it something that it's not. The same is true within the Buddhist world. People, something's going wrong and they come to the temple, oh, please, I'll burn more incense and more. It's all about the smoke. And they have the teaching wrong. You'll see that. Don't interpret that as, because one person got it wrong, that's the way. A lot of people from the West go to the East and they see Buddhism being practiced, and they're like, oh, these people are doing it wrong. Look at them bowing and these kind of things. Actually, they're doing it right. It says to make praises to the thus come one, to practice the giving of offerings. What's important though is the question to ask is, are they doing it with the right intention? So sometimes people are doing it with the right intention or the wrong expectation from doing it. So don't read the sutra as I'm sick, I want to get well, my body, my illness. We should be saying that person is sick. That person needs to get well. That person's body is holding them back. I recognize that. That illness is a problem for all of us. We're changing our perspective from me to we. That's what the sutra is saying. That's what this last vow is about. Perfecting the bodhisattva vow. We have to stop, being naughty and then running to pray. Right. So I grew up, a lot of people say either sinning on Saturday and repenting on Sunday. So you don't want to have anything to repent for. That's better. We will always make mistakes, but we should try to do better. Or we have to not think, oh, the temple is some ideal space, right? No, the temple is filled with imperfect beings. The teaching that the temple represents is excellent. We still have to work at it. We will still make mistakes. But practice is what we should be doing, not just saying, well, I have the book, so that's enough. Actually, this book cost me like half a month of food money back in college. So I still have it though, so a good investment. So I think now that you can get it online for free. So very different world, much easier. But I think it's free, so fewer people read it. All right. Any questions for this evening on those three vows?
Sensei, I have a question, not only for you, but for the whole group, if that's okay.
Sure.
So I'm wondering, what are some strategies people have for when they fall off practice, for getting back into practice? I'm curious, because I can't be the only one that ebbs and flows with practice, or maybe I am.
You're completely alone. No one has ever done. One thing I think that helps is, why do we bother having a practice space? Why do you have an altar at home? It's a reminder. It's a physical reminder of that you can do practice, that you should do practice. So this is actually my office, but just there I have a little, I'll show you. I have I received this, some of you have seen this, but I received this when I was doing the Shikoku pilgrimage. So it's an image of, look at it, not my face. It's an image of Kobodaishi, and then the Heart Sutra is on either side. I don't think you can, I haven't seen these anymore. They were given to us when we did the pilgrimage. But I have it there so that, however, busy I get with email or something, I remember, oh, it's there. So, some days I cannot do, some days I cannot do the full, long practice I want to do, but right next to my desk, there is the image, so I see all the time. And also I have a box of incense and things there, so I can at least take 5 minutes. So I create an environment where, there's no excuse to not do something. Sometimes we have to travel, or later this month, I'll be on a plane. I can't, that day, because of transferring, playing, very difficult to, do the practice, but I can still do something. Most days I have wrist beads on. It's a reminder for me to do practice, and that's been the case since I was a teenager. So we all will fall off, but those things are supposed to be aids to our practice. It's not, again, that we have to have, I have the scroll here all the time. It says, it's the Buddha, says Buddha. So I see it, I remember, I go, oh, do the practice. So whatever supports we can build in to our lives is good. And that can be helpful. So we now have these wonderful, smartphone devices or something, so you can create a reminder. And I've known people that do that. They said, they have an alarm in their calendar, 5 minutes or 15 minutes of meditation makes my life better. And okay, they'll try to do it. So we can devise strategies, but somebody has a reminder on their phone. That's good. So I always say, that's why I said, even with us reciting the Medicine Buddha's mantra, don't make a vow, I'm going to recite 100 million every day. Well, make your vow that you're going to recite 3. If you do 108, if you do 1,000, that's good. But at least try to do 3, right? At least whatever your number is, try to do that small number. When we're in formal training, we actually have, mantras for everything. There's wake up mantra, washing the face mantra, eating mantra, bathing mantra. So you're trying to integrate practice into your everything. The reason why it's kind of rigorous like that is so that you don't get out of the habit. It pushes it into you, but naturally it will be an obstacle. It will be hard. We'll have hard days, easier days, but we can do it. I remember this was a long time ago now, but my teacher was on. He was in Japan and he was traveling, and so he went outside the hotel and he was praying as the sun was rising. So he was praying, and I guess it was a very beautiful area, mountain. There's a cliff or something. So he knew he had to go. He didn't have time to do a lot of practice. He said, "I'll just go outside and pray." And somebody yelled, "Don't kill yourself! Don't jump!" And he was like, "What?" He goes, "No, I'm praying." Because they thought he was gonna like jump off the cliff because he was standing near the edge and like this. So we can find, even if it doesn't seem so formal, right? He's not in a formal space. He's outside. We can give time for reflection. We can take a moment. So it doesn't have to be so heavily formalized. It can be very informal. That's why I think I mentioned, even during the pilgrimage, sometimes, if you're going from temple to temple, you can't go into the building. The doors are closed and people stand outside. And if it's a large group, a lot of the temples are very tiny. Right? Only 4 people inside maybe. So they'd stand outside or on the steps and then they recite the Heart Sutra. So that's very quick. Right? Something that can be done very quickly. And somebody mentioned that this is now really expensive. I had no idea the price has gone up to, I'm looking right now, $125 online. I did not pay $125 in 1993. I don't remember, but it was not that much. That's unfortunate. That's a lot of money for the sutra. Any other questions or? Yes, it is. A lot of the Avatamsaka is online, but I do have connections with some of the temples in Taiwan, and they do have English like excerpt type books that you can get in bulk. So it's sort of like temple welfare. So if people are interested, I could try to find some things like this, because the first 50 pages or so is an outline of the vows of Samantabhadra. I've had this for a long time. I don't think this specific one is available, but there are lots of texts like this that are similar. They're available. So when was this published? Published in 1996. I think that's when I got it. So. Or that can be our next project. We'll fundraise for our own translation, and we'll give away to people. So but we may not be big enough for that yet. Any other questions or comments or ideas? Okay, I will. Oh yeah, running out of battery. I see. I talked too long, so I'll put up the. Oh yes, the translation of the mantra. That was a question. So the Om Koro Koro Sundari Matogi Sawaka. I am still working on the translation because this is not easy to translate. There are nuances to these words, and there's multiple nuances in Sanskrit. So I'm trying to find a definitive answer on that question. But many of the nuances are about heal, and the idea of the inner fires in the body that to be put back into balance. That imagery also has to do a lot with quenching the fires of the passions, right? So that's what needs to be healed, because it's karmic illness for the most part. But I want to find a more definitive translation and one that's less nuanced. But that's the general idea or feeling in the mantra. I can have your gasho. We will recite the Medicine Buddha mantra a few times together. Om Koro Koro Sendari Matogi Sawaka. 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 Thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening. So we will continue with the Medicine Buddha Sutra next week. I will see if we can get through the next 3 vowels, depending on the details. So thank you, everybody, for joining us. I appreciate it. And we will see you next week. Please take care of yourselves. And as the sutra mentioned, please take care of those around you who are sick and who need to be cared for, right? So this is part of what we should be doing. Thank you. Have a good night.